Is it on? Oh, yes. I appreciate you all for staying for the entire day and willing to end it on a high note of talking about child abuse and neglect. So I'm just so thankful for all of the support. Thankful for your prayers for my health. I wasn't feeling well this past week, and the effective prayers of the saints really got me feeling almost back to 100%. So thank you for your prayers. I say continue to pray that I have more money and wealth and prosperity. If you would like, you're effective. Like Donnie said, I'm Samantha Stewart, and I work as a social worker with DCF. We come in contact with child abuse and neglect every single day. And one thing I've noticed is that no family is exempt from dealing with these issues. It doesn't just affect one demographic or one socioeconomic status or neighborhood or community. It can be in the church, it can be outside of the church, it can literally be in every family that we come in contact with. So it's important that we are aware that children are suffering. It could be some children that we know. And what can we do to help these children? What role we can play. I love the way this day has gone because it really is connected with attachment theory. In fact, I had the same video of the still face that I will not show because you've already seen it in my presentation. It's definitely connected with trauma. It's definitely connected with everything we've talked about with mental illness and depression. So I just can reference back to what was already said. God's word is against child abuse and neglect. I have to just make that nice and plain because sometimes that gets a little murky, especially when people say, you spare the rod, you spoil the child. And they might lean on that. But God's word is very clear. He is against abuse. If I can have somebody turn to Psalms 127, 3-5. I know you have your Bibles on your phone, and if not, there are some Bibles in the chairs, but I'm going to need some help with getting these scriptures. So the first one is Psalms 127, 3-5, if someone wants to read that.
Children are a heritage from the Lord, offsprings a reward from him. Like arrows in the hands of a warrior are children born in one's youth. Blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. They will not be put to shame when they contend with their opponents in court.
I don't know why you laughed, Donnie, but it's true. They are a blessing, and God really wants us to understand that blessing that He's given us in our lives. And of course, it's stressful, and of course, the days are long, full of responsibility. But He wants us to know that it's a heritage and it's a blessing. And then the next verse, Psalms 139, 13-16.
For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth.
Amen.
Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be.
Right. And the psalmist he's talking about himself, but I believe God is thinking that way about all children. He knows them even before we are introduced to them. They are precious in His sight. So they're wonderful. He has a plan for them. And that goes into the next scripture, Jeremiah 29 and 11. Right. And God has that plan for all of these young children that we come in contact with. Once they're born, He has a plan and He has a purpose for them. So He doesn't want adults, He doesn't want anyone to come into to their lives and hinder them from carrying out His purpose and His plan. And the next one, Psalms 23 and 4. And I love this verse because it shows a clear contrast with that idea of spare the rod, spoil the child. The verse here, he's saying the rod and thy staff, it comforts me. Because a child with no discipline, with no boundaries, that's not comforting at all. That's very scary. If no one is in charge, what's going to happen to me? If no one knows the direction of where I should go and how I should be, then that's very scary. But here he's saying the rod and the staff, they comfort me. It provides me a little bit of more security knowing that someone's in charge, that there's a right path, that there's someone guiding me. But it's not all the way to the extreme. You never see a shepherd beating his sheep with a rod, like just, you know. No, like the rod and the staff, they're there to protect that sheep from any wild animals. It serves as protection, and it serves as guidance. Oh, you're going too far, sheep, come on over. Come back to where this is the flock. This is where we are. That's the role of the rod and the staff, and that's how we need to think as parents. It's not to beat, you don't see a shepherd beating sheep. So let's just think about that. And then in Ephesians 6:4, it says,
Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord.
right. So, God knows that we can, sometimes there's some parents that can be so nitpicking that is exasperating. I check myself on this too. Am I being too critical? If I'm criticizing you from the time you wake up to the time you leave the house to the time you come back, I'm just on you. I'm just needling you. Is it exasperating? That's something that we need to think about and we have to have that balance. Okay? Yeah, we are there to correct our children. We are there to guide them. But we also have to nurture, we have to encourage, we have to be positive, we have to know that God has a plan and a purpose for them, and what's my role in helping them to achieve that. And then the last chapter, scripture, Luke 18:15-17.
People were also bringing babies to Jesus for him to place his hands on him. When the disciples saw this, they rebuked them. But Jesus called the children to him and said, "Let the little children come to me. Do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such babies. Truly I tell you, anyone who will not receive the kingdom of God like a little child will never enter it."
Right. So he's saying, don't hinder these children. Let them come to me. And that's our role as Christians, as parents, as aunts, as mentors. Let these children grow up in the Lord. Don't hinder them. Don't be the reason why they question their belief in God and their faith in God. So I hope that these scriptures really paint a picture that you understand God values children. He loves on children. He has a purpose for them. He sees the future of his kingdom in them. And we need to also be those in that same role. We have to also nurture them as well. Okay, so that was nice. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty. There are definitely different types of child maltreatment. There's physical abuse, there's sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and then there's neglect. And also we're looking at different types of neglect. Physical neglect is just neglect of the physical needs, shelter, food, medical needs, your basic needs. Educational neglect, you have to make sure that your children are getting an education, or that children are getting an education, and then they're going to school. Emotional neglect could just be putting them in a situation where you're not valuing the emotional impact of your decisions on them. So you have to consider that. And then moral neglect, if you're thinking, you know what, if my kid was able to do this, was able to steal from Walmart, they wouldn't get in as much trouble. Let me teach them the ropes and let them do, negative things, then that's moral neglect. Now I wanted to, anybody have a question? No?
In your experience, which one you see up there that really comes to you over and over and over and over and over and over?
Yeah, we have a lot of neglect cases. We don't come across a lot of emotional abuse, but that doesn't mean that it's not happening. It's just really difficult to report, and it's really difficult to prove emotional abuse or emotional neglect. But we do have a lot of physical neglect. The physical abuse and sexual abuse cases are occurring. They're happening, and it's heavy. It's heavy work. But I just want to raise awareness that these things are happening. They can happen here inside the church amongst Christians, and they can happen outside. So just to make sure that we're all being aware and informed so that we can help these children.
Is it screaming, like when you scream, isn't that emotional neglect?
If the adults are screaming?
Like, yeah, so say if someone's screaming, I thought that was emotional abuse.
Well, at the department, we're going to look at more serious cases of emotional neglect. So when I think of emotional neglect, I think about domestic violence in the home and having someone, a child in that home, hearing the fights, being around those fights, being exposed to that violence, and then having all of that emotional turmoil, the trauma.
Screaming's like a fight. Screaming's
Yeah,
like a fight.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it can be.
Screaming, for me, it's been an impact my whole life.
Yeah, and it,
The level of screaming.
yeah, the level of screaming. Like, I mean, you can say, you know, you don't have your socks on right now. Come on, go get your socks. Why you only got one sock on? I told you 5 minutes ago to get your socks. You know
No,
that.
that's not screaming. No.
Right, right. Emotional abuse can be, you know what, your father wasn't nothing, you're never gonna be nothing. You're just like your dad, he wasn't about anything. You're worthless, look at you, you're so stupid, why you didn't do X, Y, and Z?
You're a bum, Rocky, you're nothing but a bum.
You're nothing but a, yeah. You know, let's think about, and then what, even what Rhonda was talking about earlier in her therapy, her presentation about that negative self-talk. Well, sometimes that starts with your parents. That starts within the home, hearing all of those negative things, and you just internalize it, and you keep on repeating it. So we got to make sure that we're not doing that to our families. Yes?
I know I asked it earlier, but what's DCS stance as far as like physical discipline? You know, where does that line get drawn?
Right. Well, DCF is looking at injuries. What injuries are you inflicting on your child? Your child walking around with a slap mark on their face, with belt buckle marks, bruises, you know, things like that. You went too far. And I'm going to say that God supports that. Like he said, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. It's not, you know, you went too far. Yeah, no.
I want to give you a compliment. Your department is hit hard. Not only do we have like staffing, it's cut,
Yeah.
and you guys are always in the spotlight all the time. And I believe you have a new commissioner.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So you guys don't get a break. You guys don't, you know, I heard the tremendous pressure you're under.
Yeah.
I heard about that. I heard you have to work long hours. And,
Yeah.
you know, you're always in the news. And it's something.
Yeah.
So I really have to give you a compliment.
Oh, thank you.
You're right. I
Amen.
want you to know that.
Oh, thank you guys. Yeah, no, this is hard work. But I think children should be protected, but I'm not going to say that the department gets it right all the time. They don't. And sometimes they cause trauma too within families, just the way we have to do things. So I think it's better to get informed so that DCF doesn't have to get involved. Because sometimes in a way to protect the child, we cause more harm. So let's just, you know, stay. I have a video here. It's kind of long. I might cut it short because we're running low on time. But I just wanted you to know in more detail the signs of these different types of abuses, what to look for. You know, just because a baby has a diaper rash doesn't mean that they're being sexually abused. But there's other signs and there's other things that you can look for. So I want to play this for you. You might not do the whole thing, but, oh there you go.
To protect our children from child abuse and neglect, we all need to recognize it and know how to make a report. It's important to be able to recognize the basic types of child abuse and their effects on children, and understand the guidelines for reporting suspected child abuse or neglect. Why is this important? Over 3 million reports were made to Child Protection Services in our country in 2011, involving more than 6 million children. Over 670,000 cases were substantiated, 75% of which were neglect. Over 1,500 children died from child abuse or neglect, and 80% of the perpetrators were their parents. Who are the children affected often by child abuse or neglect? Children who are less than 1 year of age have the highest rate of victimization. Overall, girls and boys are equally affected, but more girls are sexually abused and more boys are fatally injured. Having an unrelated caregiver living in the home increases the risk of child abuse or neglect. But it's important to remember that any child of any age, from any family, from any community, may be a victim of child abuse or neglect. The basic types of child maltreatment include physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, and neglect. And neglect can take on a variety of forms, including physical needs, medical and dental needs, or educational needs. Physical abuse is any kind of non-accidental injury that results from the act of omission or commission on the part of a parent, guardian, or custodian. So it could be something that the parent did do or something that they didn't do that results in the harm. Injuries are often the result of punching, beating, kicking, biting, shaking, throwing, or otherwise harming a child. But it's important to recognize that it may not have been the intent of the individual to harm the child as severely as they did, but nonetheless, they did inflict the injury, and it is therefore physical abuse. Physical abuse often involves the head, face, and neck, and these injuries occur in more than half the cases of child physical abuse. Sexual abuse is any kind of sexual activity that is inappropriate for the child's age, level of development, or role within the family. This conceptual definition helps differentiate what may be normal sexual experimentation among 2 4-year-olds that is clearly distinct and different from sexual activity between a 4-year-old and an adult. These activities can include fondling a child's genitals, penetration, incest, rape, sodomy, indecent exposure, and exploitation. It also includes pornography. And neglect is the failure to provide for a child's basic needs. Those basic needs include necessary food, clothing, shelter, and appropriate supervision, one of the most common causes for neglect. Medical neglect includes not paying attention or providing for necessary medical or mental health treatment. And educational neglect is failure to educate a child or attend to their special education needs. Emotional neglect is inattention to the child's emotional needs. Emotional abuse is a pattern of behavior between the child and parent that damages a child's emotional development or sense of self-worth. This can include activities such as constantly terrorizing and frightening the child intentionally, ignoring the child, isolating them frequently, or corrupting and exploiting the child. Those would be activities such as having the child sell your drugs because the child won't get in as much trouble as the parent would. And constant rejection of the child is another form of emotional abuse. In order to identify child abuse or neglect, one must be willing to consider the possibility that it occurs. If you don't think about it, you won't ask the right questions, and you will not make that call that could save a child's life. There are a number of red flags, or those big markers, that should make you think about the possibility of child maltreatment. It's important to recognize that as you see lists of behaviors or injuries that should make you think about the possibility of child abuse, they suggest the possibility, but in isolation, they don't usually prove it. There are behavioral indicators, changes in behavior, physical indicators, bruises or injuries, but it's important to use common sense in deciding and figuring out, does this really make me worry about abuse, or is there some other good explanation for what it is I'm seeing in the child? Common sense takes into fact normal development. You don't expect a 3-week-old child to be crawling over to the top of the stairs, so they couldn't possibly do that before they roll down. However, the child who is running and climbing and tumbling can get into all kinds of accidental injuries. We're all familiar with toddler bruises. Kids who are learning to walk frequently fall and bump their foreheads or get bumps and bruises on their shins. But they don't bruise their bottoms. They don't bruise their abdomens. They don't bruise their backs in those normal activities. Another common thing to recognize is that diaper rash is very common in children in diapers as well as young children who are in the process of learning toileting. And we don't want to confuse diaper rash and immediately jump to the possibility of sexual abuse because there's redness in the genital area. We have to think about those life events and normal sorts of activities that the children are involved in. The injuries that a child may get learning to ride a bike are going to be very different from the child who's learning to roll over. The child learning to roll over should have no injuries, but riding a bike could cause a number. What are some of the signs of possible physical abuse in the child? When the child has an injury that does not make sense for the child's age or development, such as the 3-week-old who supposedly crawled to the top of the stairs, the infant with bruising anywhere on the body or blood in the eye or the mouth is a huge red flag. Infants rarely get accidental bruises. Any bruising of the trunk, the ears, or the neck in a child who's less than 4 years of age is a big red flag, and patterned bruises or burns, injuries that have marks that outline or identify the object that was used to inflict the injury, are another sign of possible physical abuse. Bruises on uncommonly injured body parts, also a big red flag. We see kids getting bruises on their shins and on their foreheads, but it's rare to see accidental bruises on the abdomen, the chest, the buttocks, or the ears. A child who has multiple serious injuries at different stages of healing, especially if they're in unusual locations or totally unexplained, should again raise some level of concern. Any child who reports that they are being physically harmed or injured should be taken seriously. What about the signs of sexual abuse? Any child who reports sexual touching should be taken seriously. Any unexplained genital pain or bleeding. And unexplained means after a good medical evaluation, there is not a good explanation or medical condition that would account for the child's bleeding. The young child who demonstrates bizarre, sophisticated, or unusual sexual knowledge or behavior is a red flag. We have to think about, where did this child learn these activities? The child who asks unexpected or unusual questions related to sexual activity would fall into this category as well. We have to contemplate and decide, what have they learned, what are they seeing, versus what are they experiencing. And any child who becomes pregnant or contracts a sexually transmitted disease at less than 14 years of age is a sign of sexual abuse. What about the parents? When the parent offers a conflicting and unconvincing or no explanation at all for a child's serious injury, that raises the concern. If the parent shows little concern for the child, sees the child as entirely bad or evil, if the parent demands a level of performance that the child cannot attain, often child abuse occurs in the context of a child crying too much or a child who wets their pants. Parents expecting them to not wet their pants, but in fact, that's obviously going to happen. The parent who denies the existence of or blames the child for problems in home or at school, the parent who uses harsh physical discipline, all red flags. And when there's domestic violence, drug or alcohol abuse in the home, or mental illness in the home, the risks are higher to those children for possible maltreatment. The key issues in identifying and recognizing physical abuse is a story about what happened that doesn't make sense for the type of injury that the child has, or the story may not make sense with the type of abilities that the child would have. The child that has no history for a significant injury or multiple injuries of different ages. And again, any infant with an injury, a bruise, a burn, a fracture, a mouth injury, should be extremely alarming and should warrant additional evaluation for possible child abuse or neglect.
Okay, gonna go back. I just wanted you guys to get a sense of the different signs. I think it's important to, again, increase your awareness, increase your just comfort level with, I know it's not comfortable and it's never something that you want to accept, but the reality is that this is happening. It's happening right here in Connecticut. It's happening in your community, and these children do need someone to help and intervene. DCF can only work with the families that are reported to DCF. So there's no outreach crew that's going out to communities and saying, hey, you look neglected, you know, you look abused. Like, we only work with the families that are reported to us. There definitely are mandated reporters. All medical providers, school personnel, even clergy are mandated to report to the department, but that doesn't stop any one of you. If you know that there's a kid that's in your neighborhood that is suffering or might have some of these signs, it's nothing stopping you from making a report. And it's also, you're protected if you're doing it in good faith. Now, if you just don't like your neighbor because they never take out their trash and you want to, you know, hey, then you might able to have some legal ramification. But if you are in good faith, just trying to protect the child, make the report. If you see some of these signs, make the report, because there are a lot of children that are suffering. And we as Christians should, you know, keep an eye out and try to protect them. Because like in the beginning, when we look at God's view of children, He wants them to be protected. He has a purpose for every child that you come in contact with. There is a purpose for their life that was created and formed even before they were born. So, you know, we as Christians, we believe that. Let's do our part in protecting them. And if you feel like you do suspect any abuse or neglect, you can make the call into the care line, 1-800-842-2288. And once you make that record, they're going to ask a couple more information. Make sure you have some identifying information that they can follow up on. So you're probably going to need their name, their address, you know, what are your concerns. The more information you have, it's just better for the investigator. But, you know, there's nothing wrong with making a report if you have a genuine concern. Any questions? Connecticut laws, it's just basically the same. It's based off of the federal law. So physical abuse, again, we're looking at that injury. And if the injury goes against, like it's a video said, common sense. You know, if a baby, an infant, should not have an injury if they're not mobile, right? They usually just don't have bruises. So if a bruise on an infant is just very alarming. Sometimes an infant can have bruises that we don't even see. Like this last week, we had 2 children. One was in a foster home, and he had a bruise on his face. Well, once we took him down to Yale to be assessed, they determined that was a slap mark. So then they did a whole body scan on the infant sister that was in the home and found tiny fracture on her ankle. Somebody was probably pulling at her ankle and yanking at her ankle. So sometimes it's not, we're not able to see it, but if you see some of the risk factors in the home, then we can follow up on it and find out through medical. Sexual exploitation, the video talked about that. And I know nobody wants to talk about sexual exploitation and molestation, but it happens. It is happening. And if a child comes to you and tell you that this happened to them, most children are not lying about it. So it's important to take that report seriously and to make the report to the authorities. Instead of and don't do your own investigation. Oh, I can't believe that happened. What happened? You don't need the details. You just need to make the report. Same thing I just talked about reporting. We do have mandated reporters, but anyone can make a report. And about 1 in 7 children experience child abuse and neglect. So that's what, just keep your eyes open, realizing that this problem is prevalent, and 80% of the time it is a parent. So the risk factors that can lead or increase the likelihood of abuse happening: stress. And stress can take form, I put financial strain, but there's all kinds of stress. If the children are under 2 years old, 4 years old, we consider that to be stressful. As parents, you know, it's a stressful time. And also, those children are not visible in the community yet. They're not in school. So that's just a whole lot of time that child has to spend with their parents who may be under stress. Single moms or people who are struggling financially, sometimes they can take that frustration out on their children. all kinds if there's have a child that's medically complex or disabled, just the stress of caring for that child can sometimes lead to abuse. So those are things to look for. Of course, substance abuse. You guys have heard a lot about substance abuse yesterday. It does affect the ability to care for their children. Sometimes the substance of choice takes priority, and that becomes their first priority of when are they gonna get the next high, when are they gonna secure the drug, and that takes precedent over the physical needs, the emotional needs of their children. Generational patterns of abuse, like Reese was talking about with the attachment theory, sometimes what you've learned, you also reenact in your own family. So if you've had that distrustful, painful, abusive relationship with your own parents, and sometimes that's all you know, that's what you repeat. Mental health, I put the still face video here, but if you're struggling with depression, if you are, have any of those mental illnesses, that can affect how well you interact and are attached to your own children. Domestic violence is definitely related to child abuse. Just being in the presence of domestic violence can impact the child negatively. I have a video here. It's a little, just a warning that it is a lot to listen to. And I'll stop it short because I think you get the point. But this is a 911 call from she's 6 years old, and she's making the call to the police about her, for her mom. And you can, when you're just listening to the call, you can see all of the emotional abuse that she's going through just by being in that situation and having to hear and experience it. It's not going. Oh.
On the 21st, 1991, time 22:13 hours. Will be a 911 call, position 307. Standing emergency. Standing emergency. My mom and daddy are having a fight. Is she getting hurt? Stop it! Send the police, please. Okay, we're going to be there. Let me talk to you. Where's your mom? What's going on? They're having a fight because this is single forever and ever. He always had this because he has a cousin. He's always drinking, drinking. And Mom, what's his name? What is his name? Your father's name? He's my stepfather. Okay, how old is he? What's going on? Lisa? Lisa? What's going on? Hey, Mommy. How's he hurting her? He made his money. Okay, don't cry. We're going to send the police. Okay. Okay, now where's your mother at right now? She's in the room fighting with them. Okay, could you send the police? Yeah, they're on their way, but I'm keeping you on the line until they get there, okay? Is your front door open? Oh, no. Okay, you go and lock it and come back to the phone so the officers can get in? That's right. Okay. He just knocked my sister out. What sister did he knock out? My little sister. Your sister? Oh my God! What's the matter? Nothing happened! Just like enemies! Wait, I want to go to enemies! Okay, the police are on the way, okay? Hello? Lisa? The police are on the way, okay? Mommy, the police are coming.
Yeah, that's hard to listen to. But sometimes, like, people are dealing with domestic violence in their home, and they think it's just them and their partner who are dealing with it, and they're not realizing the impact that it's having on the whole family. And they don't even see it as abuse. They just see it as these are problems that I'm having with my spouse. And I'm not hitting the child. We're fighting, but there's a lot of emotional abuse that is occurring with the children in the home. And some people think that, oh, it's not even, she's just a baby. She's in the crib. She doesn't know what's going on when we're fighting. But the research shows that even that baby that's in the home during those fights carry on that impact in their life later on. And sometimes it impacts their life more than the children who are older, because I guess the older children can process it more. But domestic violence really does have an impact on the children. Some children are too afraid to go to school because they don't know what's going to happen when they're at school. Who's going to protect mommy? You know, what's going to happen? What am I going to come home to after school? Am I going to come home to the house being all disheveled and a mess? My mom going to be there? Or, you know, so sometimes they don't go to school because of all the stuff that's happening. So we have to get those reports of educational neglect, but a lot of times it's just not educational neglect. And we start peeling back the layers and seeing all of these other things happening in the family. So that's definitely a risk factor for abuse. And I would say it is abuse. It's not in the Connecticut laws as domestic violence as abuse right now. That's still a debate within Child Protective Services, but in a lot of ways it is abusive. So lasting impact. It's called adverse childhood experiences. It's all of the experiences that are negatively impact someone during their childhood. So it could be the physical abuse, it can be the sexual abuse that someone experiences, it can be just different negative experiences within the home, whether that's the domestic violence, drugs, or criminality if one of your parents have to go to prison. And another thing that they also look at is divorce and separation. They all consider that of adverse childhood experiences. And they say the higher your ACE score is, the more experiences that you have that are like that, then the higher likelihood that you'll have these negative impact in your life, whether it's traumatic brain injury, sometimes it's just serious physical injuries to abuse, depression, anxiety. When we talk about all of those mental health illnesses, a lot of it can be traced back to these childhood abuses. Sometimes it leads to more unintended pregnancies. Even health is impacted by abuse, and all of these adverse childhood experiences can impact your health. There's a higher likelihood of diabetes, cancer, HIV and STDs, probably linked to more risky behavior that people engage in, more alcohol and drug use, more criminality, imprisonment. It can lead to juvenile detention for young teenagers. And then it also affects your education and occupational. So it's very important that, one, as parents, we're doing the best that we can to shield and protect our children from having these experiences, realizing that it does impact them. But it's also important for us as a Christian community to think about what can we do to wrap our arms around all of the children that come into this building, children that we are in contact with and just in our daily goings about, just making sure that we are aware and sensitive, because trying to leave on a high note. Sorry about that, guys. I know. I was like, man, it's 73 degrees out. We're here at 3:30 talking about abuse and neglect. But there are some protective factors. So everyone who's experienced abuse and neglect doesn't necessarily have to lead this life of drugs and alcohol and, it doesn't mark the end. And I think all of our people who are in counseling and therapy, they will attest to that this is not a life sentence of like, okay, now your life is really screwed up because you've had all of these negative experiences, because you've encountered abuse. There is resiliency. And I think God is in the business of redemption, taking people, restoring them, implanting into them resiliency. And so, like Reese said, it's not, people might have emotional baggage or all of these negative experiences that happen to them, but it doesn't mean that there are, there's no hope for them. There's always hope. And so there's protective factors that we can look at to protect these children, and to, even though they've had these experiences, how can we support them so that they can transcend it? So there's 3 different levels. There's an individual level of protective factors, and the first thing is a sense of purpose. Now, what greater sense of purpose that we can tell children is that when you were born, God knew about it, and He had a purpose for you already. So yeah, your childhood could have been horrendous, could have been filled with a lot of abuse and neglect, a lot of transitions, a lot of those adverse childhood experiences. But that's not the end of your story. And God had written this story a long time ago and gave you a purpose. So I think that's a message that we need to make sure that children know and understand. And I think it's a message that the church is in a great opportunity to tell all of our kids, you have a purpose. We don't necessarily know what a kid is dealing with at home, but we know that when they come here, we can reinforce that you have a purpose. God has given you a purpose. Having a sense of purpose helps build resiliency. Having a sense of agency, a sense of I can do this. Well, what better scripture than I can do all things through Christ who strengthens us? I mean, I think this is why I'm so passionate about the Bible. Excuse me, I'm getting emotional. About the Bible studies that we have here, because that's our opportunity to touch children and to give them this message that, 1, you can do things, and 2, God gave you a purpose. Self-regulation skills, that's something that a lot of kids get in counseling. And so we try to make sure that we connect children to different counseling and resources where they can learn how to regulate their emotions. Relationship skills, problem-solving skills. But another thing, involvement in positive activities, that's something as a church body, we can make sure that we have here for our young people, and we do. Donnie does a great job with the youth and making sure that there's a lock-in, positive activities where, there's a youth retreat. Sometimes the youth retreat is the only time that these kids are going to have, Okay. Oh, didn't think this was going to be this difficult. Relationship level. Again, having one person in their life to be a mentor or a positive relationship is essential. Positive peers, so the young people in this church can really help build some resiliency in others just by being a positive influence in their lives. The parent or the caregiver well-being is another protective factor. So it's really hard for a parent to take care of their child if they're not, if they don't have what they need as far as their well-being. So we can play a part in that as a church we can be reaching out to parents. You know, we know that there's some parents who are single parents or who are maybe struggling or they have young children. Let's reach out and say, hey, you might need a break. You know, I'm going somewhere. I can just take your kid, take your kid along as well. So you can have a break and take care of yourself.
I just wanted to say, and thank you for this, because the relational level is so important to connect. They talk about one person who's significant in someone's life and making a difference. Mm-hmm. And that, I remember being a big sister in the United Way, and I was like 21, and I was bored, and I didn't know what to do, and I could have gotten into a lot of things, but someone talked to me and said, just get a little sister. Mm-hmm. And it's so many people who really aren't doing that much at that age that they could mentor just one kid. Yeah. And that relationship to a 12-year-old that could be getting into trouble in the neighborhood, to a 22-year-old who's a little different from me, 46. They could relate a little bit better than me, the teacher, to that child. Mm-hmm. So it's really important to mentor and take a moment to just reach out and touch just one kid with an hour a week. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so just knowing that, like, some children are really struggling. Some children in Waterbury are really struggling. And here we are, a church here in this community. How can we reach out? How can we shore up these protective factors so that even if they have had terrible negative experiences, that their future can look a little bit brighter and they can walk in their own purpose? Yes?
What are they doing to follow up for those children to grow up to be healthy adults and deal with what they have gone through so that they don't end up being, repeating history, what they lived? Because you need to know there's one of two things we can do in life. We can either become the people that did those things to us, or we know how it feels and we would never treat another person like that. So what are they doing to make sure that they don't go that way and have all that anger and go?
What is DCF doing?
Like to follow up for these children to grow up to be healthy adults.
Yeah.
Deal with what they, because I grew up in it, and my brothers and sisters, there was 8 in our family, and they were abused just like I was. We were all different ages, some of us close in age, but they chose drugs and abuse. History repeated itself. Out of 8 children, I was the only one that wasn't an alcoholic. I did my share of stupid things, but I watched them go to jail or get killed. Their lifestyle ended in death, and I had to sit back and watch, and it was more trauma added to my life because I was trying to stop them from self-destructing, and I didn't know how. I was just a kid myself, taking care of my siblings. Yeah. But my point is, what do they do? Like, I picked up the Bible instead of the Bible. Yeah. And I don't know why. I mean, because God had it in me to not be that way. But I chose not to hurt other people because I know how it feels. I'll take the hit. I'll lay my life down for people because I know how that feels. Helpless. Amen. So what do you do so people don't get history repeated? Well, to be honest, and I shouldn't be that honest because I still want my job on Monday, but I don't know if we're doing enough, to be honest, because we're what can you do to help? So that's what. To volunteer or something. Yeah. I didn't go to college. I have some a little bit of college, but what I do to reach out to help, I have a lot to offer a child because I lived it. I lived what they are. Yeah. Well, I encourage you to definitely use your testimony to play a role in a child's life. And I have another slide too about becoming a foster parent. But I'm single, so yes, you can. Yes, you can. We take single people. Really? Absolutely. Amen. But to be serious though, it is
the natural trajectory is to choose drugs, alcohol, mental illness, and to become an abuser and to repeat the abuse. That's the natural course of things. What the agency tries to do is intercept with therapy, with community supports, with mentoring, with counseling, with education of the parents. But sometimes the devil has a stronghold on these families that's so deep, so entrenched that they look and say, you are the enemy. And this is what I'm used to. They are comfortable. So that's why I'm kind of like pleading with everyone in here to just kind of stand up in the gap sometimes for a child. And I don't know if you know of a child in your life that you suspect may be struggling. How can you stand in the gap and say, you know what, I can be a support for you, I can be a mentor to you, just come and hang out with me for a little bit, because they need it. And so that's why I'm stressing this relationship level. You can kind of shore up the protective factor so that they can be resilient and they can beat the odds and not become a statistic. And also on the community level, having positive community environment. What's a more positive community environment than the church, right? So so we can't be so insular that all we know is just us. I think we have to just broaden our view and just look outward a little bit more and see how can we cast our net a little bit bigger and really become, fishers of men and bring those children in. Amen. Because I think that there's power in the blood, right? You've seen it in your life. We have a testimony here where out of 8, there's 1, and she's crediting it to the Bible.
They don't understand it, and I tried telling them, and they got defensive.
So I have a little video. Hopefully this is more positive. It's just about how we as a community and all these different levels can be protected.
This is my neighborhood. I grew up in this building. This is a great community now, but it's had its share of problems. When I was a kid, our community had high unemployment, a lack of resources for families, and lots of kids hanging out with no adult supervision. You might have heard about adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. ACEs are traumatic events in childhood, like abuse and neglect, that can increase risk for future problems. But they don't have to. The good news is that ACEs and their consequences can be prevented. Take me, for example. I was at risk for ACEs, and despite all the things that put me at risk, some pretty incredible people helped make sure that I wouldn't become another statistic. Come on, I'll show you around. That's Jackson. He's a cool kid. His dad left when he was 2, and his mom works 2 jobs. I hang out with him every Thursday night and help him with his homework. Sometimes we grab ice cream. It's fun. Plus he has another adult role model to learn from and trust. That's Mr. Martino. When I was a kid, he let me help him at the store sometimes after school when my parents were working late. He did that for a bunch of us. My dad actually found his job as a mechanic because of Mr. Martino. This helped our family in so many ways. Not only did my dad have a steady paycheck, which eased his stress about paying rent and buying necessities like food and clothes, but he was also a lot nicer to me, my brother, and my mom once he started working a job that made him feel good about himself. When communities come together, they can do so much to prevent ACEs. Mr. Martino and other local business owners put together a series of career workshops to help people like my dad find work. My mom also got a job with a company that allowed her to work from home and spend more time with me and my brother. Mariana has just gotten out of a class about handling challenges of single parenting. The clinic offers free childcare so Mariana's daughter, Ella, can play while Mariana's in class. The class helps parents like Mariana develop positive parenting skills, not just for babies and toddlers, but for teenagers too. This is another way our community has come together to give families the resources they need, and just one more way to prevent ACEs. This was my school, Riverside Middle, right in the heart of town. These kids are here for a sponsored summer camp. This community-supported program helps families with affordable, quality childcare and helps kids get tutoring and learn life skills. When I was a kid, I spent a lot of time at this school all year long. There was one counselor, Miss Greer, who I remember more than anyone. She was a really good listener. Miss Greer helped me and my brother get involved in after-school activities like baseball and soccer. Our coaches were super nice and were mentors to us. Staying after school for practice kept us and a lot of other kids out of trouble. When schools help take responsibility for preventing ACEs, everybody wins. My life could have gone in a completely different direction. Studies show that ACEs can have long-term negative effects on kids' health and well-being that may last into adulthood and even continue in future generations. But by people and groups taking action, ACEs can be prevented. In fact, there are 5 known strategies that help stop ACEs before they even start. You can implement them in your own community, just like we did. How? By strengthening economic support for families. By changing social norms to support parents in positive parenting. By providing quality care and education early in life. By enhancing parenting skills to promote healthy child development. And by intervening to lessen harms and prevent future risk. So, now you know my story, and you've seen the prevention strategies in my community that helped me beat the odds. I had healthy relationships with my family and friends. I learned how to take care of myself and make good choices. And today, I'm a mentor to other kids who need some extra help so they don't become an ACEs statistic. Safe, stable, and nurturing relationships and environments are essential to prevent child abuse and neglect and to assure that all kids reach their full potential. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Banana split? You got it.
Okay, so I don't have that much time. I mean, DCF's role, we investigate the reports that come in. We do the assessments, whether they substantiate it or not, and sometimes they are referred for ongoing services. We definitely try to partner with other community resources to make sure that those needs are addressed, whether it's economic or therapy, parenting skills, a whole host of things. Now we are actually looking more at racial justice. It's actually been put into law here in Connecticut so that we're making sure that we have racial justice lens in our work and we're not being slanted and exasperating inequalities. So making sure that we're treating families equally and we're checking our own biases. We also have a family-centered approach, so we're trying to work with families, making sure that their voices are heard. Before, it was more like, there's an issue, we're gonna take the child, but now we have more meetings and to discuss, okay, is there someone where this child can go that you feel comfortable, that we can check out within your family? So it's definitely trying to be more family-centered. And then fatherhood engagement. Before we were really focused on moms, but now we realize that dads are just as important and need to be engaged in the process as well. So we're working with moms and dads.
Sorry, really quickly, so I actually had a DCF social worker come to my office and do a training for us, and he said something that stuck with me, which was that poverty does not equal neglect.
Right.
And I think that kind of falls under like the racial justice lens and like kind of stereotyping certain communities or because of their socioeconomic status, and that just because someone is poor, that doesn't necessarily equal neglect.
Right.
And I was like,
yeah,
that just stuck with me.
Yeah.
I just wanted to share that.
Absolutely. Poverty does not equal neglect. And also with the racial justice lens, we've been looking at schools who are reporting, have a high level of reports that are maybe just a little skewed because of their own biases, some hospitals too. So we're doing a lot of work in getting the data and saying, well, is it really that there's more cases of abuse and neglect coming out of this hospital, or is there some biases that we need to check? So what can you do? Yay. You can take action. So definitely love your children, right? I hope I've scared you into loving on your kids wholeheartedly. We do not want them to have those adverse lifetime lifetime consequences. We don't want them to become a statistic. Let's just love on them. That's what God commands us to do. And then you can also love on children that are around you. So nieces, nephews, cousins, other children in the church. Let's not look at a kid who may, I don't know about her family, oh, she's coming to church by herself. Where's her mom? Where's her dad? Let's look at how can we wrap our arms around those kids and really pour into them. Report suspected abuse or neglect. It is happening. I know we don't want to talk about it. We definitely don't want to think about it on a sunny Saturday afternoon, but it's happening, so let's report it. We can't just leave it to the schools and the hospitals and other systems. Everyone needs to play a part. If you suffered from childhood abuse, it's okay, That doesn't mean that you are sentenced to this lifetime of suffering and all of these negative consequences. You can seek out help, see how it's impacting you, how it's impacting your parenting. You can get therapy, and God is a healer, right? So we're not sentenced to be broken forever. Be a support to at-risk families. So looking at all of those risk factors, families that are under a lot of stress, families that may have that domestic violence or mental illness, or just other things that may be an issue in their life, making sure that we reach out to those families. Looking at our church family, we are diverse. I love our diversity, but that means that we're also diverse in a lot of other different areas. So let's reach out to parents that we think might be struggling. How can we be a support to them? Stay alert, inform others. So now that you got all of this wonderful information, you can share it with other people. And then consider being a foster parent, please. Actually, I noticed, I was looking at a report, and Connecticut has the highest incidences of abuse in foster homes. I don't know what we're doing. I don't know what foster homes we're recruiting, but I just experienced this last week. It was a big old emergency on my case. Abuse happened in the foster home, and I had to find a place for these two wonderful, beautiful kids, and they had to be placed in one home for a day and then another home for a day, and I think they can stay where they are for a little bit, but it was just a scramble. So if you feel like you have it in you to be a foster parent, to kind of just take in these kids who may have been abused and are not safe in their home, and you can take them in for a little bit while the department try to work with their family and reunite them, then I think that's a noble, wonderful thing to do. I think in James, it says pure and undefiled religion is this, to look after the widows and the orphan. Yeah. So if you're considering it, it's 188-KID-HERO, or you can email kidhero@CAFAFCT, I don't even know what that stands for, .org. And there's also some open houses that they have in various communities. Yes?
Besides cases of abuse in foster homes, why don't children stay in one foster home? Why do they go from here to there, to there, to there, to there, so that they never become attached to anybody?
Yeah, I know. That's why I said sometimes the department does more damage. But it can be a whole host of reasons. Maybe it's the child's behavior, and it just doesn't work out with the dynamics within that home. Sometimes issues come up with that family that they have to just deal with their own family now, and they can't take on this responsibility anymore. So the kid has to be placed. And sometimes it's abuse, like my poor kid, he's 2 years old that I was working with last week, and he had a slap mark on his face. So we had to move him. And and now they're separated. These two kids who were brothers and sisters are separated, and it's just heartbreaking. So we definitely need more loving foster homes. You do not have to be married. You do have to be able to pay your bills without the state's assistance. That's one thing that they're checking. But you don't have to be married. And then they're doing a lot of recruiting too. So it's definitely something to consider. And that's it, believe. So yay.